Caleb J. Ross, author of Charactered Pieces, a collection of stories. And Caleb, first thing I was wanting to talk to you about is the name Charactered Pieces. I know the word character is sort of a euphemism for something we might use when we it's not damaged, it's not faulty, it's charactered. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the meaning of that in the context of both the story and the collection.
Character is obviously something that's very important to fiction writers, and it's something that was definitely stressed upon me as I was in university study learning about writing and all that kind of stuff. And character is essentially the focus of something, and when a character is flawed, oftentimes it makes that character interesting. And this collection is definitely full of very flawed characters, and it's this single flaw that oftentimes what determines how they live their life in a very broad, grand level.
The word character, did you make that up, or is it something you heard? It's not flawed, it's character.
It's charactered, it's charactered. And it's funny that you say that, because that's exactly how the character in the story Charactered Pieces presents it. It's not a flawed piece. In this case, it's dealing with jewelry. It's not a flawed piece of jewelry, it's a charactered piece of jewelry. It's more interesting because it has a flaw. I did come up with it. My university professor, Amy Sage Webb, she was a huge proponent of turning nouns into verbs in any way possible. A verb, she said, were the strength of a piece of work, and if you can pick the right verb, then you can build the right sentence, then you can build the right story. It was all about verbs. So when I wrote a story called Charactered Pieces, she immediately thought, that's got to be the name of a collection sometime. That's just such a strong word, charactered pieces.
So what was the inspiration behind wanting to put together a short story collection in the first place?
In a weird way, it kind of fell into my lap a little bit. I have been doing editorial work for a site called OutsiderWriters.org for quite some time, and the idea of putting out a chapbook series came up because I've been so entrenched in the site. My name was on this list of people to put out chapbooks. So the editor at the time came to me, and it just kind of worked from there. And I had a great grouping of stories I was really proud of that worked well together. I wrote a couple new ones for the chapbook. And it just kind of worked out just fine like that.
I've read quite a bit of your other work, and what made these particular stories compelling for you to include in this collection?
People who are familiar with my work are probably more familiar with my online fiction, which tends to be shorter. It tends to be a little bit more experimental and even a little bit disturbing. So these stories, though they do incorporate each of those elements, I think they are a little bit more focused in the sense that they would be, I guess, probably termed literary in the sense. So, they're definitely Caleb-esque, but they're different than the stuff you can get for free online.
One of your stories uses Chinese fortune cookies as sort of a device for both telling the story and also sort of a visual metafictional element. I was wondering if you could expound upon that as how that was used in the story.
I incorporated these visual elements into the story. An optimist is the human personification of spring, as a way of sort of dipping my toes into the same waters that, say, the author of House of Leaves did. House of Leaves is this great novel that just incorporates a lot of visual elements into the actual text itself, and those visual elements enhance the story and don't necessarily just comment on it. They actually become a part of the story. So they're not illustrations that accompany a story and help you to move through. They're actually part of the story itself. And I kind of wanted to test that out. I really, really liked that idea. I've always been infatuated with metafiction, which is essentially just fiction that reminds you that you're reading fiction. Incorporating these fortune cookie elements into a story that deals with a character who works at a Chinese food restaurant makes sense in the greater scheme of the story. So they're not just illustrations, they're not arbitrary pieces that reflect the story. They actually become the story itself.
My personal favorite story in the collection, Charactered Pieces, is called A Chinese Gemini, and it also happens to be the last story in the collection, and you've labeled it a non-fiction in the table of contents. Can you talk a little bit about how a non-fiction piece plays into a collection of otherwise fictional pieces, and if there's any relevance to the story's placement at the end of the collection?
And I do only note in the table of contents that it's nonfiction. In the actual story itself, it doesn't say nonfiction anywhere, and I sort of did that purposely because I really disagree with the idea. I disagree with the idea of a nonfiction piece being readable solely because it's true life and real. So I wanted someone to read this as a story, not as a piece of nonfiction. I wanted them to actually be engaged with it and find it readable for its literary reasons, for its story reasons. So
Is there any relevance to the story's placement at the very end of the collection?
I put it at the end of the collection simply because I wanted to be separated from the other stories in some sense. It could have been at the beginning, it could have been at the end, but it was important for it to be separate, possibly for my own personal reasons. But I ultimately chose the end because it, more than any of the other stories, ends on a note of hope. There's hope strewn throughout all of the other stories in different places, but this one, more than any of them, it ends on that high hope note.
In marketing this collection, this chapbook, I've noticed that you've used a very grassroots yet online sort of promotional technique with social networking and the forums and whatnot. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it all started as you know, a lot less selfish than the term marketing, I guess, conveys, and that I just am genuinely in love with literature and talking and discussing and that sort of thing. So really, it's all about networking again. It's kind of a weird salesy term, but I talk with people in forums and I get immersed in forums, and eventually that just becomes what people would consider social marketing. So really, I have a blog, I have Amazon author pages, I have forums, writing forums that I belong to, where I've met a lot of great people who are willing to help me. Traditional social networking, Facebook, MySpace, that kind of stuff. All of those sort of elements is a way to sort of get in touch with a community who loves reading and loves talking about reading and sharing reading. And then as a second side benefit, that sort of parlays into marketing, and people will actually be willing to help me talk about my book and get other people to read it. My wife's mother just purchased the book. She saw it for the first time, and she's questioning why the cover has a penis coming out of a butt on it. And Jen tried to explain to her that that's not what it was. She doesn't believe her. I thought you were going to try to make your mom not buy it.